Hi there, my name is Dr. Carla Renato. I'm a chiropractor and PhD candidate in vestibular rehabilitation from Sydney, Australia. Well, hopefully by now you know that we're heading up to Hong Kong August 4-5 for what plans to be a great weekend seminar, Managing the Cervicogenic Patient. It's probably one of my favourite topics as it really ties in a lot of the fundamentals of what we do as practitioners, whether you're a chiropractor or a physiotherapist, and how the brain interacts with it. My focus is certainly the brain and the vestibular system, and this talk today is really about those two topics. So this is really geared up for, and to me it should be something that it's taught at college or university. It's fundamental, it's contemporary, it explains what we do. It gives us the tools to be quantitative as well as qualitative, to be objective in what we see, how we assess it, how we manage it, and just as important, how we dialogue and communicate this thing. We know that communication is such an important part of what we do as a practitioner to our patients and to other practitioners. But let's use contemporary clinical neuroscience. There's so much of it out there at the moment. And this seminar is really about bringing that together. Now, it's not laden with, it's not a literature review of everything. I've picked the main ones that are relevant to us as clinicians. First and foremost, I'm a clinician. I love research and I've been teaching for a while, but I'm a clinician. I love looking after my patients, but particularly love looking after patients that other practitioners have perhaps not done as well, or they've referred to me because they've just been stuck with this particular case. And it's great that we can use a different approach. Whilst we know that manual therapy to the cervical spine can help many people, and we know that, but there is a percentage of patients that either don't get better, or those, even our normal patient, regular patients, can do better with sort of work that I'm going to be presenting. So I certainly hope you can join me August 4-5 in Kowloon, because I think it's going to be promising to be a great weekend. So the sort of topics that we're going to be covering in this video is really all about the vestibular aspect. Now, it's obviously a pet of mine, as I'm halfway through a PhD in vestibular rehabilitation, and I can tell you now the correlation, link, and importance of what I'm doing with vestibular rehabilitation to cervical spine and to chiropractic in general is very underrated. I certainly hope to be over the years to be expressing that as time goes by. But for now, let me just dive into a little bit of the vestibular system and how, as chiropractors, we should really be aware of this system. So the vestibular system, in short, the apparatus, the sensors that detect head movement and give us an orientation to the environment, is located within our temporal bone. And you can see here in this great picture, you can see the semicircular canals and the labyrinth are very much protected in the inner ear. And obviously that helps detect movement of our head and gives us an orientation of where we are in space. And this is a beautiful picture that shows the receptors, those hair cells that are embedded in our vestibular system. And we'll talk, this is not a vestibular talk, but we're going to talk about some of the connections between the vestibular system and the rest of the body. And I think there's probably no better slide than this one here that depicts this. And here we're looking at the vestibular system, the peripheral part. When it detects movement, it sends information back to our brain. And that part of the brain, which is in our brainstem, is an area that integrates information from our eye movements, from our spine, our proprioceptive system, which is why we can't separate, we shouldn't separate eye movements, vestibular function, and cervical joint function, because they're very much controlled and influence each other. So this slide here looks at how the vestibular system connects to the brainstem, connects to our eye movements, and connects to our spine, and gives us our upright posture and spinal stability, which is, as chiropractors and physiotherapists, we look at all the time. So, and the cerebellum is very much tied in with that in helping to adapt and calibrate the fine movements that each of these areas, eye movements, vestibular function, and spinal movement has. You probably didn't know that the cerebellum is involved with vestibular function. You probably didn't know that the cerebellum is involved with eye movement control. we're going to touch on some of that so you guys can better understand it as well. So the vestibular system is a beautiful system, and we're going to touch on it. I do have other courses that go through the vestibular system far more detail, how to manage a dizzy patient, and maybe we can look at that at a later time. Finally, when we see, this is interesting because in practices we often see people present with head tilts, and we may look at that as being, okay, well, that's a joint dysfunction at C2-3 or atlas and C1, or it's a subluxation this, or it's a weakness of this and a tightness of that. Sure, that may well be the case, but did you consider that head position is often and predominantly dictated by what activity is happening in the inner ear? So if we have an imbalance in the inner ear, if there's a dysfunction in the inner ear, in the vestibular system, our head may rotate, our eyes may move in a certain direction, we may get head tilts, we may get different head positions that as chiropractors or physiotherapists, we may think, well, that's a subluxated C2, or that's a tight SCM, or that's a weak this, or that's a weak that. So I'm going to pose to you that we should be looking at other aspects, particularly a top-down aspect, in considering head position as well, which is pretty cool. Now, again, don't get me wrong, there's many components that, many reasons why someone would have joint problems, but your training has probably looked at a bottom-up approach very well. I'm not going to take away from that, but I'm going to add more to what you currently do. And that's how we, as a profession, improve, stay contemporary, and sharpen our tools. And I certainly hope to add to that as well. And finally, we're going to talk about a very integrated approach to managing these patients. And we've, by the 10th hour, we've covered so much information that we need to put it all together. And I'm going to show you the literature, and it talks about care plans. It talks about how often you should see someone, how long you should see someone, when should you introduce manual therapy, when should you introduce exercises, when should you introduce eye movement exercises, when should you introduce vestibular therapies, and so on. So I'm going to show you that, and the work's already been done, but it's generally not at our disposal. So we're going to cover that so you guys can walk away with a whole bunch of useful and practical information that you can use. So finally, this is the flyer that we've made. Just go through some of the things that I've spoke about over the last number of videos. It also talks about the location and the fairly low price that it's on offer for you guys. Keep in mind that the prices that we charge both in Australia and New Zealand are generally far higher than what we are in Hong Kong. So the goal is really to get as many of you guys together so we can certainly get everyone up at a great level. And I certainly hope we can do that. We've got limited spaces available for our location and our venue in Hong Kong. We've already sold a whole bunch of them. We're probably not going to have a great deal left. And by the end of the calendar month, by end of June, early bird closes. So certainly take advantage of the early bird prices. Grab a seat whilst you can. And I certainly look forward to seeing you guys then. Take care for now.